There are a lot of different options for introducing quiet time for your toddler. You can do it with them, you can put them in a room by themselves, you can have an activity bucket, you can use a timer. The possibilities are endless, but the question is, which one's going to work best for your toddler? If you choose wrong when introducing quiet time, you're going to end up with a toddler meltdown on your hands, and that's what you're actually trying to avoid by giving them quiet time in the first place, right? So let's talk about what happens if you get it wrong when you introduce quiet time. There's most likely going to be toddler meltdowns, running away from you, trying to avoid you so that you don't put them where they need to go, throwing themselves on the floor, crying, screaming, the works. My goal is to help you avoid all that. I've got 4 easy steps that you can follow in order to achieve the quiet time of your dreams, get some time back to yourself, have some tea, read a book, whatever it is. Maybe it's a nap, maybe it's catching up on laundry. It's up to you. Hi, I'm Tanya, and I'm a behavior analyst. I help parents implement behavioral strategies based on science to help them manage their toddler's difficult behavior. Let's talk quiet time. As I mentioned before, it should be individualized for your toddler. So if you have a toddler that usually goes along with things fairly easily and can kind of start learning a routine and be okay with things after you've taught them to do it a few times, these next 4 steps are for you. If you have a strong-willed child who is a little bit more difficult, of course you can also incorporate these steps, but the other ones are to enhance these steps and help them be a little bit more effective for your strong-willed toddler. But back to our easier toddlers, if there is such a thing. They definitely have their days. The first step you would want to do is to choose a time for quiet time. So that kind of means 2 things. Number 1, what time of the day do you want this to be done, right? If your toddler naps, then maybe you want to do it during that time, because around the age of 3, they start fading out of naps, or if you're unlucky, before the age of 3. And it's a really good strategy to replace nap time with quiet time, because it's still at the same time that they used to. You don't force them to go to sleep. It's just, they have the option to play quietly during that time, and it just gives you some time for yourself as well. So you can do it during the nap time that they used to do, or you can, if they don't nap at all and it's been a while, you can just put it into the routine wherever it fits. Obviously, you don't want to do it like close to bedtime, because they might get sleepy during that time. You never know. They might end up napping. Who knows? I usually suggest that it be done after lunchtime, because usually we're all kind of a little sleepy, a little just tired after lunchtime, and it's a good way to sneak it in and to give you a little bit more time to yourself. Maybe you didn't have time to eat lunch because you were dealing with a toddler and getting them to eat, so maybe that's your time to eat. The other aspect of it is obviously the length of your quiet time, and you want to base that on your toddler and what they can handle. You need to meet them where they are. So I usually have parents start out with like 15-minute quiet time. Just give that a shot and see how your toddler does. If they do fairly well staying in the area and playing quietly on their own, then you might be able to push it a little bit next time. Try 30 minutes, see what happens. But if during those 15 minutes they're constantly coming after you or calling out to you or being really loud, then 15 minutes might be too much. You might have to start at 8. I know that sucks, but the good news is you can build up to it, and kids learn fairly quickly. So as long as you're consistent with the time of day that you do it on and the amount of time that you do it on, and then just increase it slowly so that they don't even notice. I do this with the extra stubborn kids. It can usually be really effective. And as always, you need to keep it consistent for 7 days a week, not just 5. If you take off for the weekend, or I don't know, something else happens to throw you off, like, it's okay if you miss a day here or there. That's just life. It's gonna happen. But if you're implementing any kind of a change to your routine and you need to make it a part of that routine, then you want to try to be as consistent as possible with it at first, because you're teaching your child a skill. You're teaching them to tolerate quiet time for, however long you're aiming for, and to engage in these appropriate skills during quiet time. So the more practice they have, the faster they're going to get it. But if you take some days off because you had a rough day, it's going to throw everything off, and you're either starting back at square one or you're taking a few steps back. With that being said, this is life. Things happen. You may go on vacation. You may get sick. These things are going to happen. Try to be flexible as much as you can. Just be okay with the fact that you may have to start over. That's kind of what we do with toddlers, isn't it? You get over one hurdle and then something else pops up. So I try to encourage my parents to be as flexible as they can. Life is always throwing us curveballs, and we just have to hang on. You can do it. Hang in there. How long do you think you'll make your first quiet time? Let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to hear where your toddler is at, where you hope that you'll get to go. Hopefully, you can go up to like an hour. I feel like that's a good bit of time, and you deserve it. And it's good for your toddler as well. You're teaching them a valuable self-care routine, right? I know that's the whole new thing these days, but it's true. I think that we should value taking some time to ourselves out of our day, and just realizing that it's not all about getting everything on that to-do list done. I am guilty of that. I am a big to-do list person. Here is my planner filled with to-dos, and I have to-dos on my computer, and yeah, it's bad. I'm an addict. Step number 2 is to choose location choices. That's right, I said choices for locations. The main thing about this step is to give choices. Pick some categories and then present them to your toddler. So for example, hey, it's time for quiet time. We can do it in the dining room under the table. We'll build a fort. Or we can do it in the living room on the couch, meaning that the entire quiet time they would need to stay on the couch. You could pretend the floor is lava if you need to, whatever it takes. Other choices that you can make are lighting choices. Do they want a candle lit? Do they want the lamp lit? Do they want the overhead light on? It's not really, that it's going to matter that much to the toddler. It's mostly the fact that they get to have a say. They get to make choices. That's the exciting part. Quiet time is not a choice. They have to do that. However, they can choose certain things in the environment, and that helps give a little bit of the power back to them, which will help with decreasing tantrums during this time. Other choices might include types of music or the activities, of course. A word on activities. I usually try to limit activities to things that don't make your toddler too hyper. You know them best. But for example, I work with a lot of little boys who love superheroes, have little characters. However, once they start playing with them, they tend to get really loud, and then there's fighting going on, and they're throwing them, and it turns into chaos. You don't really want that during quiet time, so I would probably avoid it if that's something that your toddler does. You want to pick activities where they're more likely to stay quiet. Another thing to keep in mind is not to give too many choices. What I mean by that is there is such thing as choice overload. So it's okay to have like the categories I mentioned, but within each category, only do 2 choices, maybe 3. You'll know if it's happening because you're given, your, let's say, activities. Hey, do you want to play with Barbies, with those Legos, or with that train? And your toddler's just like, no, I don't want to, no. Or they're saying all of them, which technically is okay, right? It's up to you what you want to allow, what you don't. They can do more than one activity. I mean, if you're doing it for 30 minutes, they may go through a few activities within that time. But the main thing is, once you're giving 2 to 3 choices for each category, they're gonna start to kind of unravel. And another thing that I've noticed is with a lot of toddlers, it helps if you have visual options. So while you're naming them, point to them, something like that. They need to be able to see it. So I mentioned music. What I'll do sometimes is go through the library on my phone, and you can see the little thumbnail for the album and say, do you want Disney music, or do you want, I think, Raffi is a really popular one. I never listened to that as a kid. We just had Disney music and then my mother's crazy Spanish music. So, you know, sometimes you get choices and sometimes you don't in life. So definitely just make sure that the choices are visual. It will help. And I usually do keep it to 2. And I mean, if you have a toddler who's a little bit more advanced and can make their own choice, say, hey, what kind of music do you want? What do you want to play with? That's perfectly okay. And while we're at it, they can choose the length of time for quiet time if you're up for it. Hey, do you want quiet time to be 15 minutes or 30 minutes? Toddlers usually don't have a sense of the amount of things, especially time. So it doesn't really matter. I mean, you could literally say, hey, do you want to do it for 15 minutes or 16 minutes? But at the end of the day, they're being a part of the process, they're participating, and they get to make a choice and control their environment in some shape or form. So if it makes them happy, go for it. Step number 3 is to go over the rules of quiet time. So that's going to mean whatever you want those rules to be. It's best to keep them simple, and it's best to keep it down to like 2 to 3 rules. They're toddlers. You'll be lucky if they remember 3. The main thing is usually that they have to stay at least in an area. You can choose an area of the home, whatever location was picked, and then it's up to you if they're allowed to leave that area or if they just need to call you if they need you. And then, of course, it's the question of when do they call you? Do they call you for an emergency? What's an emergency? What's not an emergency? You probably already know this. You have to go through all of these things, give examples, have them participate, and give you examples. That way you know that they understand. Do the best that you can to make sure that they understand. The most common rule that I usually do is simply that they have to stay in the area and that they can only call out for an emergency. I just try to keep it simple. If they, want to jump around like it's a jungle gym, as long as they're being quiet, I usually don't care, obviously, as long as they're safe. Always make sure that they're in a safe environment. I feel like I shouldn't have to say that, but maybe these days you have to. Make sure the location is safe before you put them in quiet time and leave them unsupervised. Also, of course, have baby cameras. I'm sure you still have them lying around. Use those to keep an eye on them and make sure that everything's going okay if you're not going to be within, their view or hearing distance. I don't know what you're doing with your time. The 4th step is to talk about what comes next. This is really big for toddlers. Anytime that you want them to do something that they don't really want to do, it's important to talk about what's going to come next. And if your goal is to help them transition into something easily, it helps if what's coming up next is something that they really love. I always use the first then rule, or some people call it the when then rule. Behavior analysts call it the Premack principle. Doesn't really matter. All that matters is you're basically letting the toddler know that when they do something, then they'll do this other thing. So, hey, first we're going to do quiet time in your fort. You've got all your activities here to do. And then when we're done, we're going to go eat a popsicle outside. You get bonus points if whatever activity that comes next, you're involved in it because they've just spent some time away from you. To you, it may not have felt like very long, but for them, they love your attention. They love spending time with you. So it's an extra big deal if they know that, okay, if I can be without mommy for, X amount of time, I do get to do this with mommy later and I really love it. So I can do this. I can follow the rules so I can do it. Now we need to talk about the strong-willed toddler. The one that's going to need a little more strategy to talk in a quiet time. They're the ones that are going to scream no at all of your choices, run away from the quiet time over and over and over again, no matter what you have, and argue with you that they want to do the follow-up activity now. They don't have time for quiet time. But don't panic. I've worked with these toddlers, and I've got some strategies up my sleeve that you can use. If you're up for the challenge, check out my next video for mastering quiet time with your stubborn little pumpkin to get back to, a cup of tea, a book, dishes, laundry, or maybe a nap. As always, my goal is to simply bring some peace into your home, into your parenting life, and get you back to what you really care about, which is quality time with your family. Take care.